Whoever thought that we'd be meeting in Las Vegas 2 weeks after the greatest tragedy? We lost more people in one day than any given day during the Second World War. And now America has a new problem it never had before. The possibility of substantial damage and destruction of segments of our civilian population. We always thought we were protected by both the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. But now we're going to have to divert resources to a problem we never had before. Now, when you divert resources, you got to get these resources from someplace. Therefore, we either have to give up something we had before in order to free resources to fight this new problem. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you, we're going to burst a lot of balloons here today. We're going to burst balloons. We're going to show you don't have to pay income taxes. The government has been lying about the necessity to keep books and records. The government has driven people to suicide. And the government is responsible for this tragedy that just happened, because she so weakened the United States that this could happen. The government is offering no solutions. I'll tell you, the only solutions they're offering were already written in this book 15 years ago. In this book, I wrote the very solutions that Alan Greenspan and the government is currently proposing, which are not going to help. And it shows you the irresponsibility, and I hesitate to use the word stupidity, of our federal government in really believing they can stop hijacking from all those x-rays and having people checking your luggage as you went through those machines. Did anybody see 60 Minutes? I don't want anybody to think I'm making this up. 2 weeks ago, when they had that, did you see that? They had that individual. There was 5 individuals that were hired from some agency of the government, I forgot which one, to test the security of the airports. I don't know the exact figures they gave, but in about 500 attempts, they got through about 495 times. They said it was a sieve, it was a joke. They reported the fact to the agency of Congress, who, this man was a former Navy SEAL. He even said they got through the checkpoints. They had guns strapped to their backs. They had guns in back of their belt buckles. They even got bombs through. I'm not making this up. Will you verify that this is what he testified to? Or how many people saw that on 60 Minutes? And then the joke is, he said, when the FAA, listen to this, when the FAA wanted to test the security systems, they would tell the airlines the day that they were going to test them. You remember that? He said, we never told them when we were going to come through. And they even told them the weapons or what they were going to try to go through. He even said, and this sounds so ridiculous, like I would make it up, but I want the old people out there to verify. Dan Rather conducted the interview. He said, when they try to get through a bomb, presumably a bomb, they had 3 sticks of dynamite with taped up with an alarm clock attached to it. I mean, that's the bomb. Is that what they said? Huh? I want people to verify. That's what he said. I didn't make that up. He said when they try to get a bomb, they use more sophisticated. They wouldn't go through with that kind of a bomb. And he pointed out that in one airport, they had about 15 Pakistanis, because most of the people who were doing the checking weren't even American citizens. In one airport, there were 15 Pakistanis. All they had to do, because they don't do a background check, all the hijackers had to do was get 3 or 4 of their cohorts, get jobs. They make sure they're all on the same machine, and with their cell phone, they could tell and they could go through. The fact of the matter is, when the hijackers wanted to hijack planes, they hijacked 4 within an hour without any trouble. Now, it was obvious that, I didn't focus on this problem, but it's obvious that the way you'd have to stop a hijacker is if he got on the plane. You can't stop him from getting stuff in the plane. As a matter of fact, after you go through the checkpoint in the airport, you have all these stores in the lobbies and restaurants. I don't think all those employees go through a checking when they go to work in the morning. So presumably you could go through one of those checking points, check with one of your friends who's an employee in the restaurant working, and he can give you whatever guns and ammunition, whatever you need. But how could the government not have known that? I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. They should have had those, they should have taken a page from El Al. You have that door, you can't get in it, and you have marshals flying on those planes. I mean, the cost of marshals had to be no more than the cost of all those people at the checkpoints, slowing up, getting on airplanes. There's 15 people practically in every gate. How much more money would it have to have a marshal flying? I mean, the whole thing is ludicrous, especially if you heard that report on 60 Minutes. But this is what the government does. The government could have stopped that hijacking, but it's not doing it. The other thing the government is doing is lying to the American public, especially on the health of the economy, and how Greenspan intends to solve it. Now, if you heard Alan Greenspan, and he said this over and over again, one of the first things he said is, well, the Federal Reserve will make sure that the banks have sufficient monetary reserves to cover any run on the banks or stuff like that. That's what he said. The banks will have sufficient monetary reserves. Will someone tell me what that means? They're going to print money. They're going to print money and bring it to the bank so they'll have it. Sometimes he varies it. He said, we will inject the necessary monetary reserves. What is that? What did he say again? We're going to print more money. Or he'll say, they say create inflation and print more money 10 different ways. We'll inject more money. We're going to expand credit. When he says expand credit, what does that mean? You're going to print more money, so expand credit, you can borrow more money. So the only solution the government has offered in this situation is to print more money. Now ask yourself, how can taking blank pieces of paper, running them through a press, and putting numbers on them, how can that solve any problem? What that does is create the illusion of what they're doing is pumping up the economy even more. Now, the American economy, and the stock market especially, was a bubble looking for a pin. And it found it in the tragedy of bringing down the World Trade Centers. If that hadn't occurred, the stock market would have fallen, and the tragedy of the falling market would have happened maybe a year from now. For those of you who've been listening to my show, certainly for the last year or two, and especially when I had my son Peter, you've heard him talk about the stock market as a mania. The stock market, and on television, who do you hear on CNN and all these programs? Representatives, I mean, they look good, they sound as if they know what they're talking about. They're representatives in the brokerage firms. You'll have somebody from Merrill Lynch, this broker. Now, all of them have a vested interest in the stock market. So the stock market went, what, from 9,000 or 11,000 down to 7,000? Hey, you know what the stock market was just prior to the outbreak of the Second World? Here, I got it. The stock market in 1940 was 122. During the Second World War, it actually fell below 100. Let's say 100. So now the stock market, when it was at 10,000, that means it was 100 times what the market was in 1940. 100 times. Does that mean our industrial plant was worth 100 times more than it was? No. As a matter of fact, if you put dollar signs against our actually industrial, our industrial base, probably our industrial base was worth more in 1940 than it was worth today. In 1940, we had a magnificent railroad system. We had the New York New Haven. We had, what was the value of the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Erie Railroad, all these railroads that are now gone. How about our merchant marine? We used to have shipping lines. During the Second World War, better than 60% of all the shipping that went in and out of our harbors were American flagships. Now I think we have about 150. So we had over 200 shoe factories in Brockton, Mass. They're all gone. In the last 20 years, we've seen the vanishing of our railroads, our merchant marine, most of our factories. In 1940, we made everything. We made all of our clothing, all of our shoes, all of our products. Unfortunately, you know, I'm getting to the point where more and more people don't remember what it was like in 1940, 43. But anybody, in 1940, if I wanted to boast that I had money, if I wanted to boast that I had money, what could I say? I can say, you see this tie? It's imported. What did the words "it's imported" mean at one time? Cost more money. Cost more money. The very words "it's imported" means it costs more. Now you say, well, how come it's so cheap? Well, it's imported. Is the fact that we're losing industry because of cheap foreign labor? No, you had cheap foreign labor in 1930, but we had efficient industries here because there was no taxes to speak of and no government regulation. Now, a lot of you people simply will not remember, will not understand the feeling of power that Americans had in 1945 when the Second World War was over. We just defeated Germany and Japan. Japan was totally in ashes. It took Japan 20 years just to replace the destruction of the Second World War. 20 years just to replace it. Tokyo was in ashes, so was most of the Japanese cities. Germany was largely in ashes, so was France. The American economy rebuilt Europe and Japan. Now, Americans in 1945 had the feeling that nobody could make anything except us. We created the assembly line. We were this arrogant. We sent people to Japan and to Europe to show them how to build factories. We thought nobody could make anything but us. Everything that we used here was made in America. Just to show you, years ago, I don't know, 25 years ago, I had friends, I never did it, but going to Europe was very inexpensive. They used to go to Switzerland skiing. In those days, they only had wooden skis in Europe, and Americans, you would go there with head and heart skis, which sold for about $100. The Europeans were awed at the metal skis. They would go to Europe, ski, sell their heads and heart skis for maybe the equivalent of $200 or $300, and their ski trip wouldn't cost them anything. They would look at the products Americans had. When I was stationed in Germany in 1950 and 52, a friend of mine lived in, it escaped destruction for the war, but it was a nice apartment, middle-class apartment. They didn't have bathrooms in their apartments. The bathrooms were still in the hall. We had a standard of living, even before the war, that Europeans couldn't even aspire to. We worked fewer hours. In America, women didn't work in America. Ask your grandmothers and mothers if they worked. My father was a carpenter. I had 7 older sisters. In those days, you had 4 and 5 in a family. Women generally didn't work. For middle class, if you had a job, if your father was a butcher or a baker or a milkman, had a job, your mother didn't work. That's the way it was. Now, 50% of our workforce is women. And women with children 6 months old, they have to get up in the morning and bring them to a daycare center. Why? Because if they didn't work, they couldn't meet their mortgage payments. Now, we were told over and over again, the last 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know how many times I heard, America has the strongest economy in the world. I heard Rush Limbaugh, who's normally amusing, and a lot of things he says, you know, are interesting. But I don't know where he is. I don't know where he gets his facts from. But he pointed out the American economy is the envy of the world. That's not true. Japan has a much better economy than we do. As a matter of fact, our economy is a failure. It's a failure. How do I know that? Because we don't make enough goods to satisfy our own economic needs. Last month, we had a $28 billion trade deficit. What does that mean? It means the average American consumes more than the average American produces. Now, the most primitive society can't do that. They can't eat and consume more than they produce. Even if they live at a bare subsistence, they can only consume what they produce. They can't consume more than they produce. Only we can do it. Why? Because the world is willing to accept our intrinsically worthless paper money, which creates a debt. They ship us real goods, and we borrow from them and go ever further deeper into debt. So America doesn't produce enough goods for their own consumption needs. In addition, years ago, Americans used to save 16–17% of what they produced. Now we have a negative savings rate. Now suppose you had two neighbors. This neighbor is building a swimming pool. He just came back from Europe. But you heard he does that by borrowing money. And he has no savings to speak of. But his father inherited some property from his father, so he's selling off what he got from his parents. Doesn't work, and spends far more than he earns. On your left is another neighbor who only consumes what they then puts money in the bank and is building equity. Well, who's richer? Who is in better economic shape? This man on the right, if he can't borrow any more money, he's going to collapse. This man is self-sufficient. That's the situation America is in. Now, they talk about the Second World War. Fortunately, I was alive. Unfortunately, too many Americans weren't alive. I remember December 7th. I remember exactly where I was when they told me Pearl Harbor was bombed. I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was until we were at war. Now, for those of you who remember the Second World War, did Franklin Roosevelt come and remind us that we had a strong economy, telling us how great our go? No, we knew we had a strong economy. Nobody had to tell us over and over again. The reason why they tell us what a great economy we have is because we don't have a great economy. We have to perpetuate the illusion. What the country did in 1943 is we simply shifted from civilian production to war production. Nobody paid attention to the stock market because nobody had any stock. People just didn't buy stock in those days. If they had money, they put it in the bank. People had equity in their houses. If they had a house, they were paying down their mortgage. We didn't have any credit cards. I was listening yesterday on the news, and they interviewed somebody, and he said, well, because he just lost his job, and he has all these monthly credit cards supposed to pay, and he said on the news, either I pay my credit card or I buy food. And given that choice, I'm going to buy food. So he's not going to pay his credit card debt. That wasn't a problem in 1941. People had money in the bank to the degree. Now, the airlines don't fly for 4 days, and they're going broke. 4 days, and they're broke. They're bankrupt, like a lot of other businesses. And when they had this bailout, I was watching a Senate hearing, and it was one of the congressional hearing, and he said, so you want us to bail you out? This congressman was arrogant, as if you're coming here for money, and you're against negotiations with the union. He raised some of these issues. Now, I'm against subsidies to people in the public sector, but we got to give the airlines their money. Suppose that all the airlines went belly up. Now we have no railroads. We have no shipping. We used to have ships that used to go along the coast, and we'd have no airlines. How do we get around? So as much as I'm against subsidies, we can't let the airlines go belly up. Now they're asking for $15 billion. Now I didn't know how much money the airlines paid, but I said to Cindy, because Cindy and I were watching at the same time, I said, I don't know what the airline industry pays in taxes, but you better believe it's a heck of a lot more than $15 billion. Sure enough, one of the congressmen asks, well, how much did the airlines pay in taxes last year? And the figure was $30 billion. So no wonder they didn't have any money. That's why nobody has any money, because the government grabs it all out in taxes. And if somebody is making money after they pay taxes in order to reduce it, they spend money. So they shouldn't have to pay taxes. They give big bonuses that they don't build up reserves. When I moved to an office, I had an investment, an insurance business at one time. When I put people in tax shelters, they were very big in the 60s. We drilled oil wells and went into cattle programs. And businessmen would call me in September, October, November. Are there any tax shelters still open? Once I had a man run to me with a check for $50,000 to get into a drilling fund because he could write off the whole $50,000. And if he didn't, he'd have to pay the government $25,000. So he'd rather take a shot in a drilling program than save it and put it in his own business. Even when I moved into my office in 1960, I moved into a very nice office, into larger quarters, and every time I looked at something, I figured my after-tax cost. If I looked at drapes that were $1,000 or so, they only cost me $500. Why shouldn't I have the best drapes? Why shouldn't I have the best chair? Everything was deductible. I had recessed lining put on. I had murals on grass cloth. Because everything. Why not? If I didn't, the government was paying half the cost. So I realized later when I wrote the book, The Biggest Con, how taxes encourage waste. If American industry couldn't write off all of this stuff, you think they'd have all the drapery and artwork and the paintings that they have? And no. So the income tax merely promoted waste and higher prices. Now what did this do? This caused our industry to vanish, our industrial base. Now we have more people who work for government, more people, people who work in our factories. We lost, as they reported, 1 million factory jobs just in the last 12 months, industrial jobs. We have more people working for government than are producing goods. Now, as we lost I'm going to show you figures. As we kept losing our manufacturing, we had 200 shoe factories. Oh, I just gave you a figure. I heard a couple of days ago. I knew the figure was high. I didn't check statistics, but somebody mentioned on television that now 3/4 of our apparel are now imported. 3/4. Yeah. 30 years ago, everything we wore was made in America. All our shoes were made here. Who would buy? Go back 30 years. Would anybody buy shoes made in England or Italy? You say, oh my God, how much money? Now, all our shoes are made overseas. We don't make any shoes here. If we ever had a new war, how can we drafted very quickly in 1943 10 million servicemen. Where would 10 million pair of shoes come from if we had to make them? You know, a lot of the ships that weren't, all the ships that weren't sunk at Pearl Harbor, but some were badly damaged. But all those ships were back in service, all of them, in less than 9 months. They were all repaired in our shipyards and went back. Now we don't have any shipyards. They're all closed. The Brooklyn Navy Yard is closed. The Philadelphia Naval Yard, the Boston Naval Yard. What happened to all our naval yards? Now, you know, you heard of, Nero fiddle while Rome burned. We have a council of economic advisors. Couldn't they see our whole industrial base was disappearing? So what our government did was rationalize. They rationalized. We're going into a service economy. How many people have heard that? Well, okay, go fight this new war with our services. Yeah, it takes planes, it takes oil, it takes physical, it takes material things. So what they did, rather than be appalled at what was happening, we were losing our industrial base, they rationalized its disappearance. And then little by little, we developed this absolutely ludicrous claim. How many people have heard we have a consuming economy? It's the consumer that drives our economy. If that is not the most ridiculous proposition, consuming drives nothing. Anybody can consume. Any idiot can consume. What's the great trick about that? What is hard is producing. It's production that creates consumption. Nobody would talk about consuming unless there's production to consume. Let me give you a very simple example. A farmer wants to consume, but he didn't grow anything. What is he going to do? He has nothing to trade. Now, if he goes out and he prints 20 bushels of wheat, if he has 20 bushels of wheat, now he can consume because he can exchange what he produced. You know, In the internet, one of the news internet programs reported that some woman went into like a Home Depot that was going out of business, but apparently she didn't know it. And she wanted to pick out stuff for her kitchen. How this stuff gets in the newspapers, I don't know. Anyway, she wanted to pick out stuff for her kitchen. They tell her, lady, you know, we're going out of business. And she said, well, I wanted to fix my kitchen so I can help the economy. People really think that. They're helping the economy by fixing their kitchen. The way you help the economy is some inventor who thinks of a product that we may need. Someone who's going to risk going into business and creates employment. You can't spend yourself rich. And this idea that go out and buy something. We're going to help the economy. Consume more. If you get this book, you'll discover that it's savings and the creation of capital that moves. A man came in, bought 10 of these, only a couple of, he may be here. I think was it this gentleman? No. And he was a financial major in college. This will teach you more in economics in 1 hour than if you studied, even if you got a master's degree in most of our universities. Now, I mean that seriously. How many people have read this book? Now, in this book, I start with a society, Abel, Baker, and Charlie. They have no capital, they have no savings, have no anything. Every day they jump in the water and they catch one fish, which they consume. So they consume everything they produce. There's no savings, there's no investment, and they're just living on a subsistence level. And then Abel decides he has visions of making a net. It will work. So in order to make the net, he has to give up eating for 1 day because he's not going to have time to catch that fish. So he makes the sacrifice and he builds a net and it works. But now he catches 2 fish a day. So now that he catches 2 fish a day, he doesn't have to work every day. He can start building his houses. He can start building things. And little by little, from that one piece of capital, society grows and grows. Well, I build the whole society, then certain calamities happen and society starts to collapse. And by this point, the new president of this society is called Franklin D. Actually, now look at this. So he calls in his economists. Franklin D. said, well, look, we got this crisis. Call in our economists. And now the economists come in and say, expand credit, lower taxes. And who are these economists? They're 2 parrots trained to say, lower taxes and expand credit. Now that's exactly what Alan Greenspan is saying, so we could substitute him, just get 2 parrots. See, when you say lower taxes, and why do they want to lower taxes? Because presumably lower taxes will put more spending in the hands of the public, so now they'll go out and spend. But some people correctly say that by removing taxes, they want to allow businessmen to deduct luncheons. Every time they say lower taxes, which will stimulate the economy, what are they saying? It was the taxes that impeded the economy. So in order to create the economy, now, to prove that America has probably one of the worst economies in the world is that we're the world's biggest debtor nation. We owe more, the government owes more in debt than the people of this country. Our national debt is greater than the debt of all the other countries combined. Now, in 1943, when the Second World War broke out, we were still a major creditor nation. We were a creditor nation. How can you tell if a nation is successful? Well, if it produces more than it consumes. When it produces more than it consumes, it creates an extra credit, which you then invest. You can invest in other countries, and then when the returns on those foreign investments come back, you have the people in that country share in what they produce and the returns on their foreign investments, so their standard of living goes up. Suppose you continually have a deficit like we've had, a trade deficit. Now, a trade deficit builds up, and we have to pay interest on this deficit. So now the people have to always have less, because now we got to pay interest on what we borrowed before. And last year, our trade deficit went up 100 billion. The year before 100 billion was 340 billion last year. Now, only a couple of weeks ago, I heard on the news that they reported that America, you might have heard this too, American workers work longer than the workers of any other industrial country. Did you hear that? Okay, now ask yourself, How could we have a successful and a great economy if we work longer than the people in any other industrial nation? If we had a successful economy, we'd work fewer hours. They even said we work longer hours than the average Japanese worker. And, you know, I think before the war they probably work at least 6 days a week, if not 7. So, this great economy, we work longer than the workers of any other industrialized nation. Then they said, in Europe it's not uncommon for their workers to have 4 and 6 weeks vacations. How many people ever had a 6-week vacation? I don't think, maybe I had a 2-week vacation somewhere. I don't even remember it. But certainly 4 weeks? And this is common. So, but not only do the Japanese work fewer hours, but their wives don't work. And they have longer life expectancies. Americans are the most gullible people I think that God ever created. They are told that they believe they have this great economy, even when they work longer than anybody else. They have no savings. They have to go around the world and see if they can get goods and services that they never produced. And they're told we have this great... Now, we used to have a great economy. We used to. I remember the days that if somebody had a watch that didn't work, you'd say, where was it made? In Japan? Oh, yeah, when the Second World War was over, you know how many automobile factories we... Does the word Plymouth mean anything to anybody? Have you seen a Plymouth lately? How about a Studebaker? Would you believe I had a DeSoto? You see the old Groucho Marx show? He was his sponsor. Look at we had Packard, that's the man who owns one. Packard, DeSoto, Terraplane, Hudson, American Motors, Studebaker, where'd they all go? Disappeared. They're taxed out of existence and regulated out of existence. Probably when the war ended, Japan probably just was making grass cutters and motorcycles. We have a Council of Economic Advisors, which was created in 1946, right after the war. See, oh, you know what was the maximum amount that we spent during the height of the Second World War with 10 million men under arms? 80 billion. 80 to 85. We didn't even hit 100 billion. Now they're saying, I heard this morning, the cost to clean up the debris in New York is about around 10 billion. And then to replace it is around 11 billion. So that destruction would, but there's a good side to this. That'll increase the gross national product by 21 billion. Now that's a ludicrous statistics. The American public has been taught to believe that gross national product is some significant figure. It merely shows you how hard, it means nothing. Because the gross national product will go up by 21 billion and we have nothing more that we didn't have before. There's one thing that the gross national product doesn't put a dollar figure. What do you think the average American values more than anything else? Anybody want to... What does the average American value more than anything else? What? No, I'm talking about, no. See, you don't know, but I'm going to tell you. And the minute I tell you, you're going to agree. He values leisure. Well, he wants to retire. He wants to go to the beach. He wants to go fishing if he'd like to. He wants time off, right? But that doesn't have a dollar value. If we all took a 4-week vacation, the GNP would go down, even as we're enjoying ourselves, running around the beach, lying in a hammock, making love, playing with your kids. But the government wants you out there buying goods, buying and selling. Why? Because why do you think everything is... People aren't trading now. All of a sudden they're watching television. So what's so terrible about that? Instead of going to the movie, they're watching television. Frankly, if they're not going to the movies, they got the money. So why is it important that we go out and spend our money? Because if we don't spend it, the government is not taxing anything. So the government is dying for this, like they're dying of thirst. They got to get you out there spending. If you don't spend, they don't collect taxes. The mere fact that why should you have to spend? You know, my kids are grown up. I'm at the age where I don't have to buy anything for the rest of my life. You know, how many pairs of shoes do I need? How many I rarely buy anything anymore because I have all the personal things I'm ever going to need. Why is it important? After you accumulate a certain amount of stuff, you can stop buying. Well, but the government doesn't want that. They got to get out there buying. Okay, so all of these figures, I'm going to just show you what's been happening to our country. These figures come from a publication called EIRF. It's put out by, what's his name? I'll think of his name. Lyndon LaRouche. They put out some good statistics. I don't go along with his solution, so I don't want you to think that I go along. But anyway, this shows you the stock market as far as 1999. It's probably you can see the stock market here. Now, the stock market is totally unrealistic. If you've been listening to my programs for the last year or two, and especially when I've interviewed my son Peter, we've told you it's a mania. What's it?
Can you suggest that you let them know you're not looking at their exhibits or one right now?
No, I'm not looking at their exhibits. No, these are just, here's the stock market. Going up like this, it's up here. Now, what does the stock market reflect? It merely reflects the dollar value that we agree that something is worth. Suppose I paid $250 for this suit and $25 for the tie, so my clothing right now costs me $250. Suppose we all say, well, Irwin, let's agree it's worth $500. Okay, it's worth $500. No, let's agree it's worth $1,000. All the stock market is the prices that we attach to the factories that are already here. We just agree they're worth more. And let's agree they're worth 3 times what they were worth last year. Okay. So everybody thinks they have all this wealth, but the wealth hasn't changed. The factories are still there, regardless of what the price is. Think of looking in a store where you see, you see cameras in the windows, VCRs, all the products. And now the manager goes through and lowers all the prices 50%. The cameras are still there. They're the same cameras. You haven't created any wealth or reduced anything. You just reduce prices. That's what the stock market is. Frankly, the stock market would be more realistically priced if it got down to where it was priced at the beginning of the Gulf War, which was about $2,500. The stock market didn't even hit 1,000 until sometimes after President Kennedy. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. The people are being conned into thinking that the stock market is some indication of a... Now, if you want to see what's happening to this country, let me just show you some statistics. These are real statistics. U.S. debt per household. In 1959, it appeared like it was 1,000. Which is 1996. The debt was per household was over 250,000. You take into consideration mortgages and what have you. Okay. So, okay, all right. So U.S. debt is soaring. What is happening here? Oh yeah, here is another thing. It shows you beds in all our hospitals. In 1946, there were 10 beds for every 1,000. Now there are roughly, when this was done in 1988, there were about 4 beds. Go to an emergency room. You can die there. You can wait there 6 hours before they'll even see you. And this is our great country. Railroad mileage. The railroads are down. Here, manufacturing. Here's retail employment versus manufacturing. Here's retail employment. In 1953, there were about 7 million people employed in retailing. There's 22 million in about 1995. Meanwhile, manufacturing declined. Now now they tell you to go out and buy. Yeah, go out and buy. That's going to help the Japanese and Chinese economy because chances are what you're going to buy is made in China. So, going to help the economy. But what's really pathetic, look at this. This shows you public transit in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. In 1960, it shows you the public, they had trolley cars, and there were trains. Now, there aren't any. When I was living in New Haven, Connecticut in 1943, we had trolley cars. Remember those? They last forever. You got 3 tokens for a quarter. They went all night long. If you got to New Haven Railroad, you can take a trolley car all night. You can go any place. 3 tokens for a quarter. You got transfers. Now there are no trolley cars, and after 10 o'clock, the buses don't even run. At one time, you could literally take a trolley car from Maine all the way to Baltimore, Maryland. They were interconnected. We had an urban transportation system that's no longer there. You need a car. So our economy is vanishing. Now in 1946, when we demobilized 10 million servicemen, there was a surplus in 1946. So what did the government do? Created a number of new agencies. One of the new agencies they created was the Council of Economic Advisors. We didn't have any until 1946. Now, in 1946, there was no question that America was the most powerful economy in the world. We rebuilt Europe and Japan. Americans in those days felt that only we could produce. America did anything it wanted to do. And you should ask yourself, how did we make it to 1946 without a Council of Economic Advisors? Since 1946, with a Council of Economic Advisors, the dollar has lost 95% of its value. Lost. Many things that used to be a nickel or a dime are now over $1. Used to be 2 Hostess cupcakes were a nickel, right? Huh? People are getting so much misinformation. I got a lot of information to give you, but I wanted to focus on this. I'm going to be putting something on my website. Because here is the point. What is the solution? The solution is, look, if we have to devote resources to fighting this new threat, the resources have to come from somewhere. We can't fight the threat just by running the presses and creating more printing press money. It's going to take real resources. Now, if we don't, resources are limited. Oh, there's another thing. Yeah, you want to. People aren't buying because they don't have any consumer confidence. Let me tell you, one of the first lessons you learn in economics, that human wants are unlimited. Everybody wants everything. Everybody, you don't have to stimulate consumer. The reason that people don't buy is they don't have the money or prices are too high. So if they don't buy, prices will come down. They start buying again. But the government doesn't want prices to come down because then there'll be lower tax collection. So they have to print money and say, here, go out and buy. The point is you don't have to stimulate. Nobody buys because of consumer confidence. If you need a pair of shoes, you go out and you buy it if you have the money. The whole thing is ridiculous. What drives the economy is that you have to create a climate that is conducive to people going into business and hiring people. But I know many people who've reduced. I know a man who services pools, had 10 employees. And he couldn't make any money between unemployment compensation, workman's compensation, Social Security, all his taxes. He got rid of all his employees. And he just does it himself and he makes more money. I know more people who don't want to hire anybody because they don't want all the paperwork. That's why you have problems in this country. The government has literally destroyed him. A former Chief Justice, John Marshall, remember, the power to tax is the power to destroy. And that's what the federal government has been doing for the last 70 years, destroying America with excessive taxes and excessive regulations. And the way we have to fight this new threat, the government has to recognize that because we have to divert resources to this problem, we can't waste all the money we used to. We couldn't afford to do it in the past, but now it's crucial. And we have all kinds of wasted resources. The greatest piece of wasted resources is student loan programs where we make available $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to these kids who go to college, they drink beer, they fool around, do nothing, waste reason, consume, and they come out owing 50 grand and they still don't know anything. I worked my way through college earning $1,000 a year as a waiter and selling magazine subscriptions on weekends. You can't do it anymore. But we can't afford that program. If we want to have new programs involving with defending America's new war, what are the programs we're going to give up? Well, one of the biggest wastes of resources is our whole public school system. We should have gone vouchers or close half the school. In 1939 or 40, if you finished high school, the average American went to work. Now they screw around for 4 years doing nothing but being supported, consuming resources. And what do they learn? Most of them, nothing. So we can't afford that. The government has to stop a lot of their subsidy programs. We got to get the government out of education. We got to get the government out of subsidy program. We got to get the government out of charity. We got to stop all this welfare payments. We can't afford it. Where's the money going to come from? If our standard of living has been falling the way it's been falling, without this new war, how much further is it going to fall if we have to now absorb the increased cost that is going to be created because we now have to? But the government hasn't mentioned one program they're going to give up. Now, what's Alan Greenspan going to do? He's going to print more money. He's going to create more, he's going to inject more liquidity into the economic system. That's how they're going to fight this new war, with printing press money, which is, of course, is nonsense. So I wanted to show you how current this book is, because in this book I advanced the method by which the government can fight the war. Expand credit and lower taxes. There you go.